If someone were to ask me which of the schools of philosophy has been the most helpful and useful in my own life, I'd definitely say Stoicism. I've been consistently surprised about how many modern life lessons we can learn from the ancient Greek and Roman Stoics. And I also know the Stoics have unique insights into your journey when you're approaching retirement or whatever happens next. But here's the thing. No philosophy have got the monopoly on good ideas. And whilst I'm a fan of Western philosophy, I think that the Eastern philosophies, particularly the ancient ones, have unique insights too. So in today's video, I want to focus on Taoism and how Taoism and the philosophies and principles of Taoism can apply to your retirement. And I'm going to share 7 lessons from Taoism you can use practically to live your best retirement or whatever happens next in the next chapter of your life. Welcome to What Happens Next. Now, I've been thinking a lot recently about the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. Because actually, there's plenty of information and knowledge out there, more than ever before. But interestingly, with all of this information and knowledge at our fingertips, on our phones, on our computers, where do we get true wisdom from in the modern age? Now, I think the Stoics had a lot of wisdom thousands of years ago about the principles to live a good life. But I also think there's a lot to be said from some of the Eastern philosophies, particularly when we're thinking about our own next chapter of our lives, that chapter of our lives where we've been working and accumulating wealth for a significant time and thinking about what happens next. And I think there's 7 clear principles of Taoism, the ancient Chinese philosophy, that we can use to help us with retirement. The first principle I want to talk about is going with the flow. Because in Taoism, there's a principle called Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action or not doing. Now, that doesn't mean being lazy or doing nothing at all. Rather, it's about flowing with events instead of constantly pushing against the tide. And I believe there's a life lesson here because the Taoists talk about going with the flow, whereas the Stoics used to talk about focusing on what we can control, not worrying about the things we can't, but also amor fati, embracing life with all its nuance and shadows and dark and light, and living knowing that we're grateful and lucky to live through all of it. The good news is often, and this is my experience of speaking to my clients as a chartered financial planner, is that when we hit our 50s and 60s, we're starting to look like what a decent natural flow looks like for us and how we can make the most of a bit more time. And that often includes having more time for ourselves and a bit more headspace. There's a brilliant book on this subject called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, written by the amazingly named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Took me a few times to pronounce that one, I can tell you. And that book talks about getting us into a flow state and experiencing deeper enjoyment and greater creativity. We've all been there when we've done something and time has seemed to fly. And often that's because you've entered that flow state. So the Taoists knew what modern psychologists now talk about. Focusing on finding flow instead of constantly pushing might be a healthier and a happier way to live our lives. So let me ask you a question. Where in your life could benefit from letting things unfold more naturally instead of pushing so hard? And how do you get yourself into that flow state where you're doing something so intensely but enjoying it so much? And how do you get more of that in your life? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. And without further ado, let's talk about principle 2, which is finding balance. Life from a Taoist perspective is all about balance. harmonizing forces in our lives in a complementary way. And often in Taoism, that's symbolized by the yin yang, black and white swirls that connect each other with a dot in each. I'm sure you know the symbol, you've seen it loads of times. In nature, we see this balance everywhere, day and night, seasons of growth and seasons of rest. And the Stoics knew this. One famous Stoic quote is, "Nature operates in balance. There's time for everything and nothing is rushed." Now, applying balance when we're thinking about what happens next can be very practical. The temptation is, after years of work, a very yang in Taoism pursuit. It might be in your head to go into a period of your lives where all you're doing is relaxing. So Taoist wisdom suggests you have a mix. You balance activity with rest. You balance being social with solo, quiet, considered time. And this element of balance is why we talk about, and what happens next, the balanced well-being model, and why actually thinking about our lives in a greater degree of balance, like the Taoists do, is a really important principle of a successful retirement or whatever happens next in your life. Now, all of the principles that I'm talking about, and I talk about on all of my What Happens Next videos, will be in the What Happens Next book. To be one of the first people to read the book and get your hands on the book and potentially get a signed copy, feel free to join the waiting list. The link below is in the comments, or simply, if you're not watching this on your phone, take a photo on your phone of this QR code. It will take you directly to the waiting list, so you can be one of the first people to get access to the What Happens Next book. However, the important thing when we're thinking about balance is to dispel the myth of perfect balance. The reality is we can look at other people's lives and assume they've got it all sorted out and they've got the perfect balance. The reality for me and for my clients when I talk to them is finding balance takes work, but also takes a degree of recalibration every now and again to make sure that you remain on track. But a big question to ask when you're thinking about balance is, how do you balance your time? How do you balance time between doing stuff you love and like, but also taking time for you? And what incremental actions, what tiny little steps can you take to make sure that you're recalibrating to make sure that balance works for you? Taoist principle number 3 I want to talk about is the importance of embracing simplicity. It's interesting. A lot of the conversations I have with my clients about retirement and what they really want to be doing, it's the simple stuff that comes up time and time again. It's the time spent with grandkids, walking the dog, a good quality coffee, travelling but in a meaningful way. Now, I've spoken about the importance of working out what your enough is financially on this channel before, and we'll put a link to the video where I talk all about that in the comments. But Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said it best when he said, "He who knows he has enough, or she, is rich." Now, whilst I'm not convinced by the phrase, "the best things in life are free," is entirely true, many things that I love can be achieved at a relatively low cost. Spending time with people you love and like can be free. Being in nature is free. But evidence shows that constantly striving for more, be that money or stuff or praise, means that psychologically we're never going to be enough. So the question that I'd ask you here, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, is what's the one thing you could simplify in your life right now? Is there a possession, commitment, or worry that you could release to feel lighter? By thinking about what enough means in your life, you might already discover you have what you need to live a happier, healthier life full of well-being. Let's talk about principle number 4 and the importance of nature in our lives. Now, last year I moved house to the Essex coast. And to be perfectly honest, as a Londoner, somebody who'd lived in quite an urban environment for many years, I wasn't sure the move was a particularly positive one for me. But where I live now, I'm 10 minutes away from the forest, but also 10 minutes away from the estuary that leads onto the sea. And there is a huge advantage into being close to nature. I read a book recently called Dose, written by neuroscientist TJ Power. And in this book, TJ talks about the fact that being in and close to nature enhances many of the chemicals in our brain that lead to positive emotions. The Taoists knew this too, and the philosophy and the evidence is now clear. Spending a decent amount of time in nature is brilliant for us. So the question is, what small step can you take to spend a bit more time being surrounded by the natural world? Let's move on to principle 5, and that's letting go. My experience is that often when clients retire, they're also letting go of a lot. Not only are they letting go of income, they're also letting go of their old identity and often some of their purpose. Throughout life, we accumulate loads of different attachments. Our professional identity, job titles, daily roles, and even some of those certain ego-driven ambitions. Stepping into retirement can feel like a loss because letting go of that career that gives you life structure and purpose is difficult. And for some of us, the right thing to do as we enter retirement or later in our lives is to downsize and get rid of some of our possessions, literally physically letting go of stuff. Now, Taoism talks about the fact that if we cling too tightly to things that are naturally changing, we create unnecessary pain for ourselves. Instead, there is a real freedom in accepting change and effectively disentangling ourselves from the past. You are not your job. You are not your stuff. You are whatever you choose to be. And as your life changes and changes form, you need to make sure that you're able to let go of whatever is in the past so you can really focus on what happens next. So the question that I'd ask in this area is, what elements of your life, if you're approaching retirement, do you think you're going to struggle with letting go the most? And how and what can you do to make that transition a little bit easier and make sure it's as smooth as it can be? Taoist principle number 6, one that I really love, is be like water. Because if there's one visual image that the Taoists love, it's water. Lao Tzu talked about the fact that water is gentle and unyielding, but given time, it will break the strongest rock. And that's why the Taoists talked about this all the time. Being rigid leads to breakage. Being flexible leads to resilience. And think of water flowing around rocks in a stream. It doesn't try and smash through the rocks. It simply flows in the available space, but is patient, consistent and persistent. And in time can even wear down the stone. Now, I think there's real value in the Taoist principles here when we're thinking about what happens next. Resilience, flexibility, the ability to adapt, change and evolve are all really important skills to have when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives. There is going to be change and challenge when we think about retirement, but allowing us to be more flexible, both in what we know, what we learn, what we understand, and adapt that growth mindset is going to allow us to retire more successfully. One of the things we talk about a lot and what happens next is the benefits of low-cost experimentation. Now, not all of these experiments are going to be successful, but trying stuff out to see what works is a really important step when we're thinking about what happens next. And actually being flexible enough to try new stuff is the Taoist principle in action. You might try a new activity like a yoga class or join a local club, but find that it might not be your cup of tea. However, the power of flexibility lets you shrug and say, that's all right, I'll try something else tomorrow. Flexibility and curiosity go hand in hand as well. And we know that in our 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond, a growth mindset and the ability to make sure that we're continuing to evolve and learn is fundamentally important to live happier, healthier lives. So the question I'd ask in this area is, in what areas of your life could you be a little bit more like water? Are you holding on to any rigid routines or beliefs that might be better served with a little bit of flexibility and ultimately resilience as you move into this chapter of your life. The interesting thing about stories is they're just stories that we tell ourselves. And interestingly, what we need to consider sometimes is whether those stories serve us or hold us back. Principle number 7, and one which I'm increasingly thinking about a lot, particularly when modern technology doesn't allow us to do this well, is be present. Taoist philosophy reminds us that being fully present and enjoying the journey is an important thing to do. After decades often of striving towards goals, financial or otherwise, and future milestones, it can feel unfamiliar to slow down and simply be in the now. Yet this might be the greatest opportunity we've got in this chapter of our lives. The opportunity to enjoy and savour every day without the hustle, bustle, rushing of working life. So my recommendation is take the time today to celebrate the small wins and be grateful. And the question that I'd ask here, and I'd love for you to answer this in the comments, is what are the small wins you can celebrate today? And how can you make today a good day, even if it's a super ordinary one? So I believe that Taoists can teach us a thing or two about retirement. What do you think? I'd love to know in the comments. But I want to make sure that you've got as much perspective as possible when you're thinking about your retirement. So I want to share 2 more videos. This one talks about the Stoic rules of retirement. And this video talks about the Stoic lessons you can learn from to help you live whatever you want to do in the next chapter of your life. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the channel soon.